Welcome to the Psychology Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Hoy. The Psychology Talk Podcast is a unique conversation with experts in the field of mental health from around the globe. Topics include hypnosis and mind-body treatments, ethics and cultural diversity, psychotherapy and psychiatry, emerging treatment modalities, and much, much more. While you're listening, please give us a like and subscribe to the show. It helps us to continue to provide excellent programming. And now, here is the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, my guest is Dr. Rachel Harris. She is the author of Swimming in the Sacred, Wisdom from the Psychedelic Underground, and Listening to Ayahuasca. Dr. Harris is a psychologist who has been in private practice for 40 years. She has spent 10 years in an academic research department where she published more than 40 scientific studies in peer-reviewed journals and received a National Institutes of Health New Investigators Award. Dr. Harris splits her time between an island in Maine and the San Francisco Bay Area. Today, she will be discussing her book, Swimming in the Sacred, and other things. Dr. Harris, welcome to the Psychology Talk Podcast.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Hi. Well, tell us maybe a little bit about your book. I think that's kind of why you're here, the main reason, and maybe kind of give an introduction to it, and then we can kind of step into conversation about that.
Well, the book is based on in-depth interviews I did with 15 women elders in the psychedelic community. And these are women who have been working underground, which means illegally, for at least my inclusion criteria was at least 20 years, but many of them have been working 30 and 40 years with a wide range of entheogens and in their own experiences at all levels of dosages. So they have really been students of these medicines. And then I interviewed sort of auxiliary women who didn't quite meet that criteria, but I felt had something to contribute to the context of the whole thing. So these are the voices of women that have been doubly silenced. They're silenced as women, and they're silenced because they're illegal. They're underground. Mm-hmm. So they still cannot speak at conferences. I used all pseudonyms.
I know, which is kind of ridiculous because the FDA controls these substances in a really harsh way. And it seems like with the approved FDA usage, I imagine that it's only going to be under certain circumstances and people with licenses, right? So if you want to step into a different way of utilizing it.
No.
Yeah, you cannot do that.
Except Oregon has made psilocybin legal. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole different ballgame. They're doing online training, and the criteria to be a psychedelic therapist is you have to have a high school education.
There's so probably pluses and minuses to that too, right?
So good luck, Oregon.
Yeah. Well,
so that's a quite different approach. And I think there's going to be lots of different approaches, some of them legal as in the FDA approved studies, and some of them newly legal in these states that are really experimenting. And then the vast underground community is growing. But the women I interviewed are the elders.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about that, about their position as elders.
Well, it means there wasn't the pressure there is now to try, to try and get these medicines to all different people who are suffering. Back then in the 60s and even in the 70s, they had time to work on themselves. And they spent 5 or 6 years working on themselves, and in fact, continue to work on themselves. So they have a life philosophy that it's a continuous process of working with themselves. And they do it mostly through entheogenic journeys. And, I explained to one of them that you could become a therapist and never be in therapy. And she just couldn't even believe it. She didn't know that was possible, which I'm sorry to say is entirely possible.
It's even more possible now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Since they've removed that criteria in most schools for having a a smidgen of it from a faculty
Not even
member.
a smidgen, right? So,
Yeah.
so these women are really committed to their own psychospiritual unfolding, and their use of entheogens has continued throughout the whole lifespan, not in a sort of rhythmic way, maybe once a year, and the people they see use the medicines in this way. And this is in stark contrast to the research going on at the universities, which are looking for the most cost-effective approach. And so there's a 3-month window where you get some therapy or counseling before and after, and maybe 1 or 2 journeys. And then that's it. They look for symptom reduction. So the women are looking for spiritual unfolding.
Well,
Very different.
Yeah, it's very different. And the thing that struck me reading the book and in general, I think this is what people are looking for. People are looking for meaning in their lives. And I think in Western society, that's been yanked out or put aside. It's very much materialistic kind of paradigm, consumer-driven paradigm. And to fill this, as I think Philip Cushman stated, to fill the soul up with something, right? It's empty, you got to fill it up. But I think people are looking for something more. Would you say that's why they've been, to some extent or another, these elders and this underground movement has been going on, parallel with all of the research? And when it was stopped by the Nixon administration, I mean, it's been going on.
Yes, that was it. Yeah, it continued underground despite ex-President Nixon. Yes, these women have committed their lives to their own work with the medicines and then to their work with other people with the medicines, even when it was very risky. And the one woman I call the eldest of the elders because I interviewed her when she was about 86. Now she's a couple years older. And she said, even if these medicines become legal, I would continue to work underground because that's where the sacred container is. Mm-hmm. So there's a real commitment to that spiritual process.
Yeah. Maybe you can describe what some of these people did, or maybe some of their own experiences. I know you list a number of like childhood spiritual experiences that many of them had, because it really was a very rich kind of narrative that you were coming up with, kind of a general narrative in these interviews. Like there's so a lot of them had spiritual experiences in childhood, adolescence, and even even Al Hubbard, right? The first the male who's listed in there as kind of an archetype of.
So that's because he's dead. I didn't interview him, but he should get.
He's also very male, from what I understand.
he should. I spent 6 months on him while I was writing a book about women elders. I found everything I could on this mysterious rogue character from the 50s, basically. Yeah. I think he died in the late 70s or so. But he was the one, because of his early childhood experience with the Virgin Mary. Okay, this is really not my realm. But he met her. He was in a woods. He grew up in rural Kentucky, and he had this visitation with the Virgin Mary. And he had a lifelong relationship with this unseen other. I mean, this spirit. This is no drugs involved here, but that spiritual opening in him enabled him to recognize, when he did find LSD as a grown-up, decades later, he recognized this is a spiritual process. Yes, it helps people psychologically, and he helped many alcoholics find a way to stop drinking with LSD mostly. But he recognized it was a spiritual experience, and he developed a set and setting that is used today that's designed to turn the person inward during their experience.
So it was Hubbard who came up with that.
That's his, and he should get credit for it. And because Timothy Leary wrote an article that got published in a journal in the early 60s, people often credit him. But it came from this really uneducated rogue character who grew up in rural Kentucky. It came from his childhood experience.
Well, I mean, there's something to be said for indigenous, maybe not this First
Indigenous
Nation,
Kentucky.
indigenous Kentucky, right? I mean, there's a lot that goes into the melting pot that's there that we don't even recognize anymore. But
and then, well, I can tell you another story about him that will give you a clue about how wild he was. I mean, I think he was visiting Laura and Aldous Huxley, right?
Mm.
I mean, this is just sort of a casual visit. And he excuses himself and he goes to the bathroom and he takes a couple of hits of nitrous oxide. He happened to be carrying a canister with him. He comes out of the bathroom and he says to them, well, I just had a conversation with the Virgin Mary. So this, I mean, we laugh as psychologists, but this is also the world that these women elders live in as well. They have ongoing relationships with unseen others, which is sort of the anthropological term for non-material entities.
Yeah. Well, I think that Al Hubbard, I don't know how I know this, but nitrous oxide, I don't think it makes you talk to the Virgin Mary, but well,
that's your story.
For him, it worked. It opened the gateway, but I would have to think that he had an ongoing relationship with these unseen entities, or that unseen entity. So
exactly.
It wasn't a drug.
It wasn't just the drug.
But I'm sure Huxley and his wife were amused. Nonetheless. But yeah, what a trip. But as a kind of archetype for the people who become involved in this kind of sacrament relationship with the medicines, right?
That's a lovely way to put it, by the way, a sacramental relationship with the medicines.
Right.
That's a beautiful phrase. That's accurate.
Rather than trying to get symptom amelioration, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's more of like you're going to change yourself with it,
Transform.
Right. Rather than
the real leap.
Right. Rather than just be able to function in the rat race. Right. That's not the idea behind this, which is kind of antithetical to the approach that a lot of the psychedelic research that's being done now is. But I guess you take what you can with what is offered to you. But as an archetype for this kind of person, or having characteristics, I guess he has many of the same characteristics that these women elders have, or he had. Well, right? To a certain degree.
This was the one, the childhood spiritual experience was one he had in common. Okay. But the whole rest of his life, I think, was directed to money and power.
Well, that's different.
Frankly.
Okay.
So that's not exactly how the women function. They really are. They're like priestesses. They're really on their own spiritual, psychological journey, that life is ongoing and their relationship with the medicines continues to live in their lives. So here's another example, and that's Albert Hoffman, who synthesized LSD 25. Mm-hmm. He lived to a ripe old age of, I think I have a note, 102. But at age 97, he did an LSD trip. So that gives you the perspective. I doubt I'll be around at age 97, much less ingesting LSD. But that gives you a sense of this is a lifelong process, and it unfolds differently at different stages of life. And people who have been a part of this world have used these entheogens throughout their whole lifespan.
Yeah. Okay. But it's not the entheogen themselves. It seems like, but it's more like the spiritual discovery and unfoldment of themselves as people, as individuals.
That's been their process. That's right.
Which, is pretty remarkable that it's been going on. I don't think it's remarkable. I think it's just if you're walking around in society, you're not going to see jinns, right? Unless you look for them. You're not going to see fairies.
Most of us don't
look for them, and you're also probably not going to know about this underground kind of sacrament for two reasons. It's highly illegal, right? Schedule 1 narcotics, and it goes against the whole process of being a good little cog in the wheel of the machine of society.
Right. It's really underground.
Which, as a clinical psychologist, that's kind of my job, is to make sure you fit better back into that clog in the wheel. Unfortunately, or fortunately.
Yeah, sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Well, I don't look at it that way, but that's kind of how it's I think our jobs are set up like that. That's unfair, but it's kind of true.
It's one aspect. No, it's one aspect. Yes.
Yeah. So what are, like, I know you mentioned some of the personality traits, like openness to experiencing.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about
Alport's idea, right? Which has gone on to influence McRae and Carmen.
Well, there's that little reference to Alport, but it's measured by a hypnotic questionnaire.
Yes.
Do you know that the Telegen
absorption scale,
which was developed to measure hypnotizability.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
And it's part of it's one part of one of the Minnesota
personality
inventories. Yeah, not the MMPI, but another one. Yeah. But yes, it is. And so absorption's a big part of it. And then there's the openness to experiencing portion of the neo-PI.
Yes, and there may be a correlation between these variables. Yeah. But I have a theory. Well, I just want to claim also my emphasis on childhood spiritual experiences, often leading into this kind of leading into finding relationships with entheogens. This is my theory. I haven't read it anywhere. So,
well, then you better publish it quickly.
Well, I sort of have, but I take responsibility for it. It's my theory.
All right.
But another theory, and this is being talked about, not in the way I'm talking about it, but the absorption variable, I think, has to do. Well, first of all, I think these women are very open. They're very permeable. So they get high absorption scores. They would be easily hypnotized. And I think it makes them, they have a knack for being able to shift states of consciousness easily. Mm-hmm. And I think people like this, who have this kind of variable in their personality, I think they need lower doses of the drugs. In other words, I think they can travel into the psychedelic realms much easier, and that they're at risk for being overdosed, that they don't need the same dosage that other people who are guarded and heavily defended. They may need a bigger dose in order to travel and let go. But here's a clue. I was talking with the women about lower doses and, how do you figure out the dosage and this sort of thing. And since they've done everything, they know the experiences at different dosage levels. And she said, well, the lower doses are very important. You can remember more and bring more back for integration sessions and to think about. And then she adds, but I like to fly. And so there you get a sense of that would describe most of them. I like to fly. Well, I would never say that. That's not something I would say.
You did mention there was almost like, there's this concept of kind of like going, like having emotional contagion or in like when I work hypnotically with people, deep trance states, or working with like extents, like even if I don't have to use hypnosis with folks with DID, it's kind of like I'm picking up on a lot more. I'm more in a lot of intuitive attunement with people. Sometimes I will say things and they're on the cusp of thinking it, possibly because the same neuro associations are just kind of floating in the air between us. But they think it looks like I'm psychic, which can scare them away sometimes. But like there are these odd anomalous things that can happen in hypnosis. But you mentioned having this kind of like emotional contagion. You described it as an expanded state. You would be sitting for hours talking about these experiences with these women, correct? And then sometimes you would have a hard time. Tell us about that.
It's also called a contact high. So
exactly, yes, but they weren't doing anything.
No drugs were involved.
I understand. I don't know how I understand this, but I understand the contact high as well.
All right, you don't have to admit to anything.
I admit to that. Yes, I'm underground about these things. But anyway, yes. So it was a kind of contact high because you were entering. I suppose you were just so absorbed phenomenologically working on this stuff.
Exactly. And I didn't realize it until I got up to leave and knew I wasn't really in good shape to drive home. I had an hour's drive to get home. Mm-hmm. And, I spoke to the woman, a few days later, and she said, well, when you reached for the doorknob, you looked pale as a ghost. And I just was not grounded. So
Wow.
I mean, this tells you about me as I drove, less than a mile to a gas station, focused on putting gas in the car. And here was my cure. I bought a package of peanut M&Ms. So I got the protein and the sugar and I made it home. But, I still wasn't really grounded. And I happen to not usually have trouble with being grounded. I'm very open and permeable, but I can ground. So I called a friend and she understood what was happening, even though she's not that savvy about entheogens. Yeah. She knew energetically what was happening. And she talked to me on the phone for a good 30 minutes or so. And I sort of came down. So this is now 2 hours later.
Well, I was going to make a joke and say, like, sometimes people recommend alcohol when you need to get grounded in certain situations.
that would never even occur to me.
Well, maybe not for that kind of a situation where you need to kind of come back to earth. But peanut M&Ms, I think it sounds like, no plug. We get no plug or no kickbacks from the Mars Candy Corporation here. Wow. Okay. So what do you make of that? Like, I know that you can probably we talked about this in psychological terms, grounding, kind of a dissociative or absorbed state. But what does that say about these people? I mean, they're really in this space, right? I mean, they're more in two worlds than most of us are. Right. Which, as a psychologist, what do you make of that as a psychologist rather than?
Well, they don't have DID. It's not like that.
Right.
They have an expanded view and concept of reality. Their vision is much bigger than most people's. So here's one way this gets manifested. One woman talked about, the setting of the counseling sessions before the journey are very important, and that's where you clarify your intentions and kind of learn about what a journey is going to be like and prepare for it. And here's one of the women saying about setting intentions. We are responsible for our intentions and our choices, responsible to ourselves and to humanity. So there you get a sense of how big their vision is, that they are not just working on symptom reduction or to make their own lives better, or as Fritz Perls used to say, people come to therapy just to perfect their neurosis so they'll get better results from their neurosis. They don't come to change their neurosis. He would kick those people out of the room. But you get a sense that they are oriented toward humanity. I mean, it's a much bigger view. And interestingly, Gary Snyder, the poet.
Yeah.
Ultimately, all such journeys, he was talking about vision quests. He wasn't even talking about entheogens. All such journeys are done for the sake of the whole, not as some private quest. Again, there's a much larger spiritual perspective. And that is the world that they live in. And that's a different way of being in the world.
Shouldn't that be the way everybody lives in the world?
Well, back in the 60s, I thought if everybody, did these if everybody tripped, then we would all change and be much more, concerned about peace and love and, harmony. And it didn't work.
Well, maybe because you were thinking that the drug was doing it all and you weren't in that mindset. The setting of your head is different. Most people are not in that kind of.
There's truth to that,
And our society doesn't support, most people, if you think about hypnotizability, we can talk a little bit about that 68th percentile. Most people are moderately capable of dissociation and absorption. And some of them are the rock stars, right? The rock stars and the superstars are over here. And then there's the people who are absolutely concrete. And it's not going to happen at all, right? Give me a pill. And maybe that's the give me the pills side of that spectrum is where society wants us to be. Most of us are here. And if you're thinking that the experience of the one time or, whatever, 20 times you've tripped is going to change you, it's probably just going to make you want to, as Frank Zappa once said, acid is a very dangerous drug. It turns hippies into yuppies.
That is what happened.
Right. That is kind of what happened.
That is kind of what happened.
Right. So, but what was the quote again about what was the quote from the woman? Not Gary Snyder. Gary Snyder is basically paraphrasing. It's being responsible for yourself and to the earth. Is that what?
We are responsible for our intentions and our choices, responsible to ourselves and to humanity.
That is not a yuppie.
No.
Right.
No,
So,
that's a priestess. These women are priestesses.
Exactly. So, it's hard not to fall into temptation to be just self-oriented, right? And kind of physicalist oriented in our society, I think, but
absolutely.
I think it's that's the difference. And also the kind of, you're in the presence of a person who lives and breathes that. And even if you're not being dosed, it can feel like it if you're in their presence, because it's a kind of emotional contagion. I think indigenous societies, I would say, they have a platform to bring the 68th percentile of us more over to, a more holistic perspective of reality.
Yes. Yes.
Rather than atomistic.
Yes. So they're not limited by a materialistic worldview.
I want to kind of go back to the kind of feminist perspective of the book, or in the sense that it's a more feminine kind of quality that you think is important. And you had a quote from someone who's, I forget who the quote was, a male guide who was, I'm not sure who it was. Yes, yeah. Yes. Is it okay if I read it, or do you have it in front of you?
Yeah, sure. No, go for it.
I think women make better guides than men. They have menstruated and suffered, and they're better at suffering than men. Their timing is more sensitive. When you're involved with the deepest part of a person's psyche, women are more careful than men, including me. Women tend to trust and respect the process and don't push them one way or the other. You can stop someone from crying simply by handing them a box of Kleenex. Women are less likely to get in between the person and their experience. That's a pretty powerful.
Yes, this is someone who's very wise. He's been working for 50 years underground.
You could construe it as sexist if you really wanted to look at it, because it is saying, you could, but it's also kind of I think you're saying it's coming from a wise space, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And a very respectful place.
And because it's not, I think the idea of like having an intervention here, have a Kleenex, rather than sitting back and letting the process kind of take itself and work itself out. Like there's not this attempt to try and fix something.
Exactly.
Which is kind of problem solving is kind of what I guess men, at least in Western culture, tend to do, rather than to let things kind of roll out. And it's swift to closure, right?
Yes, too swift. Yeah.
Too swift to closure, which is more, I guess we could say, not creative. It's more logical, right? Coming up with the best answer right now.
And it shuts down the process.
Shuts down the process, right? So as opposed to like experiencing your experiences. And having this kind of like, it's almost like a meta perspective. You describe a lot of these women have a meta perspective with their own consciousness. Like they're aware of it happening and their thinking process, right? And they accept it as something that's going on while they're also kind of observing it. I think that was one of the people you're describing in the book.
Well, they as really as any. Well, first of all, let me clarify. These women are not therapists. They're not trained. They're one or two had.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I assumed they were at the beginning. I quickly learned no, they are not therapists.
Right.
One or two might be licensed, but one, I think, no, maybe two. But they are, because they have done so much work on themselves. They're able to manage their own countertransference, what we would call countertransference, to keep themselves out of the process. And this is what Laura Huxley, I have a quote from her where she says, I think it's the most challenging aspect of guiding is to keep themselves out of their client's journey. That's true for therapists too. So the women are able to keep themselves out of the client's journey. And yet they're also, they're sitting with someone who's under a blanket with earphones on and eye shades. There are very few clues to visually see what's going on. So they have to sort of intuit their way into the client's experience. They have to sort of pick up energetically what's happening in there, because the client is usually not talking all that much. And so they have to be able to enter into the journey and accompany the person. And they do this intuitively while managing their own personality and issues to keep it out of the way. Now, this, that all the therapists could do that.
Oh, yeah. Also, I think it's certainly you're not letting, I think in terms of hypnotic work, sometimes it's more allowing the person to just kind of let things bubble up and see what happens with them, right? Or guided imagery sometimes can be very spontaneous. But, and there's some, I think, crossover, like we talked about, like the idea of absorption and hypnosis and whatnot. And,
yes. Yeah. These are expanded states.
Right. And not many people work with those things anymore.
Right.
It's really tough as nails to get people even, I work with, in my own practice here, I work with people who, clinicians, getting them to actually go into training when I suggest it, and they don't pick it up. They don't touch it.
The research office I was in was at a medical school, University of Miami. And there was one grand rounds where they showed a film of this. So this would be in the 70s. And it was a film of a C-section under hypnosis with no anesthesia.
Yep. And you probably don't see that a whole lot these days.
No, you don't see that a whole lot.
Right. Well, you're not going to make a whole lot of money off of it, right? Like the anesthesiologist
is out of business.
Right, is out of business. And, if you could do one-offs with a lot of psychosomatic issues and other things, smoking cessations or things, can't say one-offs for smoking cessation. The literature doesn't support that, but in some cases it works like that, rather than having, 6+ sessions at, so much per hour. It's
right.
Yeah.
I understand why it's not popular. The Hopkins, great success with smoking cessation with psilocybin. Those. Yeah. I mean, that's the toughest drug to get off of. Tobacco. It's the most addictive.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe we can talk a little bit about, you mentioned they are not therapists. What do they do? Could you describe that versus, contrast it to like how the psychedelic therapies have been studied at Johns Hopkins and elsewhere, USOMA? Maybe contrast, what do these women do versus what happens in a clinical setting, quote, air quotes.
Yeah, well, it is really a whole different world. The psychedelic therapists who are being trained online mostly, or working. I'm sorry, or working in the research offices. They have very limited experience with the medicines because they're illegal and it's not easy to get and it takes time. This is not something you can do every weekend. It takes time to build up a map of these other territories and relationships with the medicines. So, the need for psychedelic therapists is so great that these people don't have time to develop that level of expertise and familiarity. So they're flying blind. Practically. That's one answer. Mm-hmm. The other answer is they have just a few sessions before and just a few sessions after. So they're hamstrung even therapeutically as therapists, because the attempt is to make this very cost effective. So they can't, if someone has this incredibly rich experience, they can't see them for 10 sessions or in an ongoing way. It has to be very limited. The women, I asked one woman for instance, one of the elders, well, what if someone calls you 2 days after ceremony and says, I'm thinking about something. I'm not sure. I'm not clear about it. And she would often say, and I asked her point blank, will you see her? Can she come in and talk to you? She said, no, I would talk to her over the phone and I would charge her for that consultation or integration, but I wouldn't keep seeing her. Now, no therapist would say that. We all say, oh yes, come in next Tuesday. So even though she has a master's degree in some kind of spiritual psychology and she's unlicensed, she's not thinking like a therapist. Mm-hmm. She said, if someone continues to want to work with their experience, I'll refer them to a psychotherapist in private practice. Or if this intuitively feels appropriate, I'll tell them to come in for another journey. Not a lot of journeys, but sometimes there's continuity between journeys and something needs another journey to unfold more completely. And so there's a therapeutic process. Now that's my word. They would not use that word, that unfolds spontaneously in the journeys. The other side of this is other elders said, if somebody's wanting to journey too often, I won't work with them. This is not about just having journey experiences. You need time to integrate. So you see, they're sensitive to both sides of this.
Okay. So they use the term integration.
They do, but mostly because all the therapists are using it.
Well, you do have a chapter entitled, What the Hell is Integration Anyway?
I know. I was so glad the editors let me stick with that title. There's so many different interpretations, but the way the women see, they don't see integration as something that happens and now you've integrated that session. They see this as an ongoing process of unfolding, which is very different from a psychedelic therapist who says, well, now we've integrated that journey. There's this
Well, I was at APA in 2019 here in Chicago, and they took over the main stage. Michael Pollan was there. I think it's the folks from Johns Hopkins were there. The entire team, the MAPS people were all over the place. It was exciting. But one thing that I asked a question about, if you're working with these medicines in this process, or if you see somebody who's, comes into my practice who's gone through, 15 sessions of psychotherapy with two sessions that have psilocybin, a medicalized dose, what do how do I help these people? And well, he said, they have to integrate this stuff because it's unfolding and it's constant. And it's more, and he also described, he said, you should be as client-centered as possible with them in this process. Open-ended.
That's pretty vague, isn't it?
Right.
I don't really know much about this process.
No, not at all. But I mean, it's like saying, well, you could take it as like, we don't know what to do with them after they've been in our lab. That's a very cynical way.
That would be a little more honest.
I think though, what their conclusion they're coming to is with the follow-up, I think, is that there needs to be follow-up, and people need to you have to think of it in terms of longer term psychotherapy, right? And it has to be, it has to be, which is another way of putting it, that is an exploratory unfoldment of the soul.
That's lovely.
Which is not what I can say. I mean, I guess I put it on my website, but I don't know how many people would show up. Like, if I were in California, that would be okay.
Your chances would be better. Maybe
Colorado might be a little bit better. Yeah, Chicago's like, how can I get back on the rat race? Although that's changed a lot, so it's 2020. But I think what you're describing is they're more of a spiritual unfoldment rather than, and it's. But I think it's interesting that they find people who might think of it as like a video game or a film, and they just keep wanting to have these experiences, and they try to rule out the folks who are not.
That's right. They will rule
serious about this. Yeah.
Yes. One example of that is I spend the winters in the San Francisco Bay Area, so there are tons of ceremonies going on every weekend. And this one guy was going to something different every weekend night, Friday night, Saturday night, just all over the place. And he was also working with ayahuasca with a shaman who I work with. So I know what happened. And the shaman said to him, "That's fine. Go and experiment, but don't bring that energy here." When you're finished with all that experimentation and you're ready to be serious in your relationship with ayahuasca, then come back. So that was a lovely way of managing that experimentation.
Yeah. Well, no, that's a very subtle, nice kind of, that's great. Don't bring that here. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, and I'm curious though, like some of the women you interviewed have actually apprenticed with indigenous healers.
Yes. Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, this one woman was with a Peruvian shaman, and this went on for 6 or 7 years. So she was in Peru a lot of that time, even though she lives in the States and she's Anglo, she's American. She was in Peru a lot of that time. And I guess after about 6 years, he said to her, "You're ready to sing," which is sort of the expression of the healing that happens in a ceremony. It's the singing the Icaros is actually a big part of the medicine. And the Icaros they kind of enter into the client's body and they do cleaning and cleansing and it's actually an explicit part of the healing. I know you're looking at me as if I'm crazy. This is a shamanic cosmology.
I'm just trying to
go with me.
I'm integrating that. Yeah.
Yes. No. So she's in a real apprenticeship with this older shaman. And after 6 years, he says, "You can sing." And she says, "No, I'm not ready." This is already very different from what people are saying these days. "No, I'm not ready." So she would sit at his elbow, which is the expression of an apprenticeship. You're right there at the elbow. And he would sing, and she would sing like a nanosecond right behind him. She knew the songs, so she wasn't quite with him, but she was almost right with him. She did that for a year. So that was her apprenticeship. And it's interesting. She has colleagues who have trained also in the same Shipibo tradition, which is one of the Peruvian traditions. And they it's just like a peer supervision group might have for therapists, is they check with each other. Did you see this in this person? What happened when I sang that? So they're checking their shamanic visions and the process of working with people during the ceremonies. So they continue to learn from each other, just like therapists hopefully do.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a longer term kind of like process, right? And it's probably, I hate to say it, but it's probably more in-depth training than many people receive these days as psychotherapists.
Yes. Yes, I would agree.
Yeah.
And then other people, trained with Stan Groff, who was doing the breath work, and they trained with Ralph Metzner. And I don't just mean they went to workshops or training sessions. They were part of the inner family with some of these elders in the psychedelic world. And so they learned again at the elbow.
Okay. And were these, when you were doing these interviews, were these people interested in talking with you? Did it take a while for you to make the connection? Because I've had one patient who has worked with someone in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I spoke briefly with her myself, and she was open to speaking with me to kind of talk about that integration piece. But I could imagine, and there was a kind of like, keep it on the down low kind of experience of talking. It was like, It's like we were meeting in a dark alley, like kind of thing. I was on the phone, obviously, but like, what was it like meeting with these people? I assume you have more connections because of your own research and your own connection to with ayahuasca and things like that.
That's right. The ayahuasca book opened up connections. But they are these women, especially in the San Francisco area or the West Coast, where they know each other. There's a vow of secrecy. Mm-hmm. And so I was referred to this one woman who lives outside the Bay Area, and she's, she gets this blind email from me. So she calls someone in the Bay Area to check on who is this Rachel. And she happened to call one of my key informants who was introducing me to people. So she said, okay, I'll meet with her. And then we found 1 week when I had 1 week when I was available. I could go anywhere. And she said, well, I won't be available. I'll be in California. And I said, well, wait a minute. I'm in California. She was in California that 1 week, 1 hour away from me. So I drove over to meet her. She meets me at the garden gate. I get out of the car. We look at each other and we recognize each other. I hadn't known her. I didn't know her, but we were both at Esalen at the same time. I was there, I had done the residential program at Esalen in the late 60s, and I was on the staff, and she was coming to Esalen frequently because she was in a training program with Fritz Perls. So we recognized each other, even though we had never hung out together. And we knew tons of people. We had a lot of friends in common. So I was accepted because of those kinds of connections. So it unfolded easily.
Yeah.
But when these women dove deeper into psychedelics, I managed to get myself back into graduate school. I went a very different path.
Uh-oh. You were one of those people that Frank Zappa warned us about. I see.
Well, the truth is, these women, another thing they have in common, you were asking, they are not afraid of anything.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid of everything, except maybe graduate school. But I don't like to fly. I don't like the high doses. That's not where I want to go. So I'm really a different kind of character than they are. They're very adventurous. I mean, interviewing this woman at age 86, she says something like, well, I haven't done ketamine in quite a while. I'd like to do it again. I don't even know if I want to be alive at 86. You get a sense this is a whole different perspective.
What is their relationship to the medicines? I mean, ketamine is obviously it's a
drug.
It's a drug. It's a man-made substance, right? I mean, it was a tranquilizer, right? Or
it was an anesthetic.
Anesthetic, yeah.
No, there's one woman who's wanting to work on a book on ketamine therapy, and she feels that she has a relationship with it. So I have to respect her experience and description of that. But I honestly don't understand. That's the least. I understand that the least. That's one of the statements that I really don't get. I certainly get a relationship with the plant medicines, and even LSD originates from plants, and MDMA, I think, comes from willow trees or something. I mean, I can understand even the far reaches into the plant kingdom, but I don't get it with ketamine. I don't understand a relationship with something that's so clearly a chemical.
Well, that certainly would be an interesting book to read, that's for sure. Or the perspective.
Well, she's one of the two. I think she's one of the two licensed therapists. So she's had a lot of training as a therapist, a private practice, training in trauma. Mm-hmm. She's, been a functioning therapist for most of her life. So it'll be interesting what she has to say about it. And I think the therapeutic community is just learning how to deal with ketamine, and we're already. I think it's already more wild than I would like to see, where you can, order ketamine through the mail. You know that.
I did not know that. I know that you could get a drip down the street here in Chicago.
Well, you've missed an opportunity.
Well,
you can do. I shouldn't advertise this, but anyway, there are companies that are sending. You meet with a Zoom meeting with a medical doctor, and then they send you dosages. And
they must be. I know that it's like $1 a bag or something, or a couple dollars a bag, because the patent is gone. It's like, I'm not. It's not that expensive. What's expensive is if you provide it's providing the administration staff.
Yes, so
having somebody to set up the IV, phlebotomist.
It's a big money maker.
It's a huge money maker. So it's about $700. It was for a while here.
It is going to keep going up. But the mail order thing that happened is I have one friend who's she's a therapist, a solid therapist. She's in her early 50s, so clearly a different generation than I am. And she's working with ketamine where her clients get it through the mail. And she said one client took a month's supply one day.
Oh, no.
And now what do you do? She sent them to the ER.
Well, yeah. I hope they were okay after that.
Yeah, they were okay. But this is not recommended. And these are the kind of crazy things that the elders, male and female, in the psychedelic community, we're all kind of worried about this sort of thing.
Well, and the bad thing is if it's easy for a bad operator, a kind of Nixon 2.0 could show up and ban everything, even though everybody across. Yeah, right. And that would be horrible. Okay. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, or have we not covered some point? What haven't we talked about here? I've almost admitted that I've done Schedule 1 drugs.
I know you're going to cut that.
No, I'll leave it in. I don't care. It's been a while. It's been a while.
Yeah.
No one was hurt in this broadcast.
Yes, right. Exactly. I dedicate the book to the women. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I would like to say, that the phrase swimming in the sacred comes from a song that a Mexican curandera would sing working with magic mushrooms. And this is Maria Sabina. And she would sing a song, I am a woman who swims in the sacred. And the phrase captures this sense of being in a world that's not just a materialistic world, but that it's penetrated with other energies and other dimensions. Mm-hmm. I am a woman who swims in the sacred. This is that's totally lovely, uneducated Mexican woman. It's a wonderful poem.
I don't think education necessarily means that you're wise or smart.
No, it's not really relevant here.
No, it's not a guarantee. But certainly being wise and smart guarantees you're wise and smart. All right. Well, Dr. Harris, your book is Swimming in the Sacred. It's a wonderful read. I really had a fun time talking to you. I'd love to have you come back again if you're up to it. Oh,
me too. It was fun.
I wish you all the best for the book. Has the book been received? I know that folks like Jeremy Narby and some others have given it praise, parenthetical praise in the front of the book. But how is it being received? It just was released, right?
Yes, it's just the past week arriving from Amazon. Yes, so it's sort of fresh off the press. I'm getting a very good response. People really do want to hear from these women elders, and they recognize that this is a different source of wisdom than the research studies.
Well, maybe in the best of all possible worlds, the research folks would work more with these elders and also with indigenous people to kind of embrace more of a holistic approach to the medicines rather than a reductionist approach.
Yes, it could at least be informative.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope it keeps up. And I hope this is part of that process of informing people. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you all the best and all of the elders the best as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. And the book is available on Amazon, and you have a website? Oh,
yes. The website is swimminginthesacred.com.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Did you know the Psychology Talk podcast is all over the World Wide Web? Well, not entirely all over, but we are on social media and we do have a website. Pop over to www.psych-talk.com to find out more about the show. All material is copyright the Psychology Talk podcast. Opinions of our guests are not necessarily those of the host or the show. Material is provided for entertainment and informative purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.